Readers, reviewers, countrymen, lend us your ears.
And a huge thank you to all of our Patreons.
Thank you to the Pit Fighters, the First Swords, and all of the Bright Stars, Truth and Courage. Welcome today to the Brothers Gwyn channel. It is just myself, Ed. Today, I'm sorry, Will is back off to uni, so as again, he's abandoned me. But I'm going to be doing a very exciting tier list. I read 107, I believe, books last year. A lot more than Will. Will just doesn't really read anymore. I don't know what's happened to him. He's fallen off. But I'm very excited to be doing a tier list, which I've never actually done before. So I'm going to be recording my laptop as I do this. As you know, all those big YouTubers do. So hopefully it's fun. I'm sure it will be. It'll be fun for me anyway. It's really cool just seeing all the book covers of the books that I read last year. And it just kind of shows all the different phases that I go for on my hyper fixations. I don't know if anyone else gets that, where you become obsessed completely with maybe a genre, maybe an area of history, and then you just read everything about it. And then a week later, you're on to something different. So I can kind of see all of my personalities layered in this video. Let's find out what happens. So 2024 was a very big year for my reading journey, my reading canon. I sound very pretentious doing my reading journey. But yes, so it started off with Cold West by Clayton Snyder. Now, Cold West is kind of like it's a Western fantasy, really. It's quite a short book. I can't actually remember how many pages it is, so I'm not even going to try and guess. But I enjoyed Cold West because I love a Western and I also love fantasy. So kind of mixing those two together, it's a book, I guess, written for me. It doesn't say it's written for me in the front of it, but I feel like it was written for me. Snyder's writing voice is fantastic. The only thing that holds me back with this book is that the first 60 pages or so are copied from Unforgiven, the Clint Eastwood film. Superb film. But it's almost word for word, which, you know, I'm all for having your influences on your sleeve. You know, I'm really kind of leaning into them. But is that an influence? Maybe. But I'm going to stick it at C because, yeah, I think it was a solid read. I'll definitely read more by Snyder. He's got a very, very interesting writing voice. Now, another Western that I read was, it doesn't really feel like a Western, but it's Days Without End by Sebastian Barry. Now, this book, Sebastian Barry is an Irish author. He has an incredible writing voice. This book follows two characters, two men, and you see their journey in America, and you see a whole lot of their lives. It covers about a 20-year span. It's at about 300 pages, so it does cram a lot into that page count. But I mean, you see anything from the destruction of Native American villages to the Civil War to drag performances. You've got found family here. You've got all of this life weaved together. This kind of alien-esque world, really, that feels modern, but it feels so alien to us, especially from a modern, time period. But it's incredibly bloody, at times incredibly beautiful, and it's a remarkable landscape of history, really, I'd say, the 19th century. The thing that holds me back with this book, rather than putting it into the upper tiers, would be that there's a distinct lack of emotional connection with the main characters to the story that they're in. It just feels like they're kind of just going along living, and there's no sense of depth to them, which is a shame because I think Sebastian Barry's writing is fantastic. Craig Johnson's The Cold Dish is a very solid, crime, but set with a Western backdrop. But it's modern day. It's kind of like Yellowstone, if Yellowstone was maybe not True Detective vibes, but like Silent Witness kind of thing. But I've heard that this is a series as well, the Longmire series, and it's very good. I enjoyed it. I listened to it. I think the characters are all distinct. I did, which is, I never can guess really what happens in a book. If I do guess, it's predictable. Is that a bad thing though, to be able to guess something? Does that mean that it's just seeded very well, or do you want a bit more subtlety? Who knows? But I'm going to stick it there in C tier. So started the year off. This is chronological, by the way. All of these books. By the way, here's all of those books. Just looks amazing. So yes, The Revenant, Michael Punk. Well, I'm not a big fan of Michael Punk's writing, unfortunately. Now, The Revenant, this is the book that inspired the film, The Revenant. obviously with Leonardo DiCaprio. Fantastic film, absolutely love that film. Directed by Inarito. So, The Revenant, the book, the true history of Hugh Glass is not satisfying at all, and Michael Punk sticks with the history. It's written nicely, but there's no sense of drive or excitement, really. It's a pretty horrifying story. The bear attack is written pretty well, but it just didn't really sink its teeth into me. Sorry. Louise Erdrich, The Roundhouse. This is one of the greatest books I've ever read. You guys, if you are a regular viewer of the channel, then you will know that I talk about this as often as I can. But Louise Erdrich, she's a Native American author, and the Roundhouse follows a family of Native Americans, and the mother of the family has been sexually assaulted, and it's all about her husband and her teenage son trying to kind of find out who did it and trying to help his mother heal. It's a really poignant, really powerful book. The writing, the prose is just magnificent. The attachment to the characters. It feels very Stephen King-esque, where you are head hopping and you've got this group of teenage companions, and their friendship is just forged fantastically. But I'd say The Roundhouse, one of my favourite books I've ever read. The Deloriad by Missouri Williams. This is a very uncomfortable read. It is... the content is purely about a family that has survived a cataclysmic event on Earth. And they've survived through incest. And it is just exploring how they live. Some of the characters, they're incredibly grotesque. I felt as uncomfortable during this read as I did during Child of God by Cormac McCarthy. I would say I didn't connect to it, though, on an emotional level. I think Missouri Williams' writing, very capable writer, the way that they were able to explore the environment, explore the characters, the themes that played out were very interesting. But for me, it just didn't hit those beats of what I really want in a book that's going to make me love it. Think Like a Horse. I can't quite remember the author. This is a non-fiction, and it's about a cowboy who has used horses to help people in all different scenarios. So it's kind of thinking, how can horses, help us with a modern day perspective, heal our wounds, I guess. He helped a lot of people with trauma, and it's just really interesting to listen and to read the thoughts of someone who is able to help people in an avenue of horses, of animals, which is something I'm really fascinated with. I love animals. We've got tons of sheep and goats and horses, and there's definitely a healing power by being around animals that I found. So this book definitely captured my spirit, my imagination. I really, really enjoyed it. Susanna Clarke Piranesi is a book that I think everyone loves. I would say this is a very whimsical, charming book. Susanna Clarke's prose is so smooth. It's as smooth as melted butter. I really enjoyed Piranesi. I wouldn't say that I fell in love with it. I wouldn't say that it blew my mind, but I would say that I am very interested in reading more by Susanna Clarke. I believe she does have a book out this year, but I definitely want to tackle Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. So yeah, Piranesi, I would say, is my first book in the B tier. It wasn't my favourite book ever, but I really can see why people love it, and it's definitely a book that I would recommend to a wide range of people. When you've got that fantasy element as well, I love having a book like that you can recommend to everyone. Anna Smith Spark, A Sword of Bronze and Ashes. Now this is, I would say, a Celtic-inspired, mythological, fantastical book, and Anna Smith Spark is one of my favourite writers, prose-wise. It's so sharp, her writing, and it does go in avenues that I just wouldn't really expect. I really, like I said, really enjoy her writing. This is about a mother looking after her family, and her family, this mother is essentially a veteran, and her past has come to haunt her. Love that premise, we always do. And it's just written fantastically. Philip Chase, Dr. Fantasy himself, did a wonderful review of this book, so I would say go and check it out if you're more interested in reading some Anna Smith Spark, because she is the queen of grimdark fantasy. Some people don't like the term grimdark, but I like it. Right, In the Shadow of Their Dying is the collab of the decade. It is Anna Smith-Bark teaming up with Michael Fletcher, who wrote Beyond Redemption. Both of them are grimdark giants. There is a lot of blood in these pages, but would we expect, less blood? I don't think so. So I really enjoyed In the Shadow of Their Dying. So Michael Fletcher writes from one perspective, Anna Smith-Bark writes from another perspective, and Michael Fletcher's, he's got this kind of this quippy, humorous style of prose, and then Anna Smith-Bark, it feels like something otherworldly. Now, she does write from a demon's perspective, but her writing is just so suited to that. It's perfect. And I really enjoyed the stories. The pacing, I think, was very, very good. It is a fantasy story. It's about an assassin being hunted by a demon, and I love the way it plays out. So I'm going to put it in my C tier, which is getting a little bit crowded, isn't it? The Bullet Swallower by Elizabeth Gonzalez James is a experimental western, I would say, with some magical realism thrown in for good measure, and it explores the impact of the actions of your ancestors that have on your life. Now, the author is writing about someone in her family, in her lineage. Oh, I sound very medieval there saying lineage, don't I? But she's writing about one of her real life ancestors, and it is set in the 19th century. He was a bandido, and it's exploring, as I said, that idea of whatever your ancestors do, how does that reflect on your life as well? It took me a while to adjust to her style, to the world, but after about 60 or so pages, I was really heavily invested in the story, in especially the magical realism elements, the fantastical sections. I think were really, really, really brilliant. And yeah, Elizabeth Gonzalez James is a great writer. I'm definitely keen to see what she writes next. And as you can see, at the beginning of the year, lots of westerns. So I'm going to put it just ahead of The Cold Dish. Now we're moving into fantasy. Crucible of Chaos by Sebastian de Castell. Now, Sebastian de Castell is probably one of just my favourite people out there. I always love chatting with him. He's so fun. He's such a gentleman as well. We definitely need more authors like Sebastian de Castell. That rhymed. So, I know, guys, I do hear you. We all miss Brasti. We all miss Kest. Some of us do even miss Falkio at times. Maybe. But Estevar, the protagonist of Crucible of Chaos, is very worthy of taking the torch from those three best friends. And alongside his great mule, we are swept along a marvellously exciting and mysterious story that has every staple of Sebastian's writing that we've come to expect and love. Crucible of Chaos was so much fun. It's got that witty humour, it's got that building up of tension that Sebastian does so well. So I'm going to put it just behind Piranesi. Now we have one of my favourite books of the year, and it is Return to Adan by Philip Chase. Now this is book 3 of the Adan trilogy, and as you guys know, Philip Chase is one of my favourite people. Now the fact that he is a dear friend of us, hasn't coloured my review. I genuinely adore Return to Adan. It was in my favourite fantasy books of the last year, and it's a book that I constantly find myself thinking about. It's got that kind of star power, as some of you will understand the reference, but it just finishes this trilogy so perfectly. Now, the way that Philip writes, his influences, he has them on his sleeve, but he takes things in a completely new direction. There are essentially 2 endings to this book as well, and I love how each of them play out. It's just a masterclass in how to write a final book in a trilogy that has epic fantasy mixed in with this intimacy of characters, and it's just superb. So it's going to be my first A-tier book of this list. The next one is The Words of Kings and Prophets by Shauna Lawless. We love Shauna Lawless's writing. She's just superb, and this series is historical fantasy, the Viking Age, but it's in Ireland. It's so refreshing to have that period, but it's set in Ireland rather than in Britain. going to put it? I really enjoyed this, and it has no book 2 syndrome. It is, I think, a slower paced book than maybe some of Sean Lawless's others. That definitely is a strength, but it builds these relationships and it builds tension, and it sets up book 3 perfectly. That's his job. That's a Roy Keane reference there. I'm going to put it just ahead of Piranesi for me. On Earth, We're Briefly Gorgeous, probably title of the year that I read last year, by Ocean Vuong, is a very interesting literary novel. It follows a boy's upbringing as he makes his way from child into manhood, and it's a very interesting book because on one hand we have a really fascinating, heart-wrenching story full of really rich and poignant themes, and the writing is just picturesque, it's beautiful. And on the other times it feels a bit like a checklist of what a literary, a modern contemporary literary novel should have in terms of content, in terms of what's in the pages, and it just feels like Vuong is just kind of trying to tick those off just to get there, which is frustrating because I feel his prose style, his voice is superb, and when he really lent into those extra layers of his writing and it focuses on the uniqueness of his imagination, then I found it incredible. But there was lots of sections that I just didn't quite gel with, so I'm going to put it just ahead of the DeLorean for me. Now, Arnie Schwarzenegger, again, one of my favourite people. The documentary on Netflix of him was fantastic, and this book is just, it's called Be Useful, which is just about 7 tips, essentially, on how to really maximise your potential. I listened to this because I just wanted to listen to him tell the story, and it was really, really fun. I think it's a really, really good read. He is a very fascinating man, a really interesting life he's had. Conan the Barbarian, one of my favourite films, so I will always love hearing what he has to say. I'm going to put it just ahead of Cold West. Tecumseh and the Prophet by Peter Cozzens is a non-fiction book, and if you are interested in the Shawnee chief Tecumseh, remarkable man, then definitely read this Peter Cozzens version of, well, not version, but his relaying of events, because it is just one of the most fascinating stories. Tecumseh was essentially the original chosen one. When he was born, there were stars that flashed across the sky, and from that moment on, his people knew that he was going to be someone special. And he's one of these few historical figures who has a really impactful name, as well as the what actually happened in his life was impactful. It is very much worth his name. He earned it. And what I love is this book focuses on the relationship between him and his brother, the Prophet. It's a fantastic read. Peter Cozzens is one of my favourite non-fiction writers. He also did, I believe, The Earth is Weeping, which is a book written in response to Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, which both of them are just incredible books if you want to read about various Native American cultures. So Tecumseh and the Prophet is definitely going in my A tier. Talking about Native American literature, now House Made of Dawn by N. Scott Momaday. It essentially kick-started what is now called the Native American Renaissance. I believe it's written in the 50s or the 60s, and House Made of Dawn is a fantastic book where you follow this character getting back to America after war. He's a Native American and he's really struggling to settle back into society because he's being pulled in 2 different directions. He's being pulled in this post-modernist way and then also in his traditional rights. And seeing that play out between this character is fantastic. It's very riveting, but also N. Scott Momaday's writing, goodness me, there are passages that just blew my mind. It's incredible. It's a seminal novel for a reason. I'm going to put it in my lower A tier because it's just a superb book. A Mighty Dawn by Theodore Brunn is a Viking Age novel, and it's set in Scandinavia. I love it when we have a Viking book that is set in Scandinavia. It feels, again, very fresh. What this book does well is that it has some really interesting fantastical elements, which by the end of the book were my favourite parts, and I just think they were done so well. The first maybe third of the book, a lot of stuff was happening with the central character, and some other things, the people around him, that I just didn't gel with personally. I wasn't a big fan of where it went, and then an event happened where that character left that scenario, and I started to enjoy it a lot more. So there are parts that I wasn't a fan of, there were parts that I was a big fan of. So I'm going to put it at the top of my D tier, but Theodore Brun's definitely someone I want to read more of. I'm finding I've struggled a little bit with historical fiction in the last few years. Maybe the last year, really. Maybe I'm just being dramatic, but I haven't quite found my love of it again. But we will talk about historical fiction a little bit later, because you'll see. Janny Wirtz, To Ride Hell's Chasm, possibly another title of the year. This is a fantasy novel written, of course, by Janny Wirtz, who's got just a fantastic name in fantasy. She's such a kind, genuine lady, and I'm desperate to read more of her stuff. She's just a fantastic person overall. And To Rise Hell's Chasm focuses on a variety of characters in this medieval fantastical world, and someone has gone missing, and these two characters are set out to go and find them and bring them back. What I love is that premise sounds so simple, and Janny Wirtz finds a way to make it complex. She finds a way to do that, but she makes it complex, interesting, intense through the characters, because they have a variety of backgrounds. They are just so distinguished, and the thought that must have gone into crafting these characters as well as she did is just fantastic. So Janny Wirtz is at the top of my need to read more list, because I really gelled with her prose. I really enjoyed her characters. It was a big book, but it didn't feel like a big book at all, which I think is a really massive compliment to Janny Wirtz's writing. It wasn't the most quickly paced novel, but it didn't need to be. It's more of an exploration of characters, and the ending was just fantastic. So I'm going to put it at the top of my B tier for last year. Dead Acre by I can't read, which is a shame. As a booktuber that I can't read, I will put the name of the author up on the screen. But Dead Acre is a Western fantastical book. Western meets fantasy, basically. And why did I listen to this? Obviously I love Westerns, I love fantasy, but Roger Clark, Arthur Morgan himself, narrated this book. And his delivery was fantastic. I did keep thinking it was Arthur Morgan in the book. That's not a bad thing, though. But also, his voice, Roger Clark's voice, is just so iconic. It's as iconic as Doug's voice, who does The Witcher, does Geralt, and also as iconic as the guy who does Kratos. So, yeah, Dead Acre was a lot of fun. It's a very short listen, but I think there's a series of them on Audible, and I think you get them if you're on Audible as well, which is really, really cool. But yeah, they're great to listen to. They're a lot of fun. And if you want to have kind of a palate cleanser that's a Western meets fantasy, then this is the way to go. So I'm going to put this just ahead of The Bullet Swallower, because I had so much fun with it. Now, The Will of the Many by James Arlington is a bit of a booktube darling, and where do I put this? It's a big, big question, because when I first read it, I fell in love with it. It was like this perfect blending of Red Rising, most importantly Golden Sun, meets maybe Bloodsong by Anthony Ryan, and it's got this Roman vibe going on, and I love it when people inject a historical inspiration into a fantasy book. I think it adds a layer of maybe comfort to the reader, but it's just very exciting for me as a history nerd. So The Will of the Many, James Arlington, it's paced brilliantly. It's a book that I want to reread, because when I first read it, I absolutely loved it, and then the more books that I read last year, the more I was thinking of The Will of the Many kind of going, not going down, but like other books were just overtaking it in my enjoyment level. But it's crafted brilliantly. I'm going to put it just below To Ride Hell's Chasm. I'm very excited to read the rest of this series. I probably will reread it before that, because there was a lot of twists. It twists and turns like a twisty-turny thing. It's like that maze in Harry Potter, I would say. Right. Now, I know on our channel, we are Papa Gwyn's sons. The Few of the Gods. Did I like it? He hasn't sent me my money this week, actually, my allowance, so probably put it in E-tier. No, I'm joking. I mean, Will and I, we kind of really don't talk about Papa Gwyn too much because we are very aware that some people, foolish people, may accuse us of being biased. I don't know. But The Few of the Gods was just an incredible climax to one of my favourite series of all time. The Bloodsworn Saga feels like it was written for me. It's that Viking Ages meets fantasy. I mean, it's basically Hrolf Kraki's saga, but just a lot longer. And that is my favourite saga of the Icelandic sagas. The Fury of the Gods by Papa Gwyn. So proud of him for getting this book out there in the context. He went through so much to deliver this book, and I've loved seeing people's positive reactions to The Fury of the Gods. It's definitely gone down so well. It is Papa Gwyn's first book to be a New York Times bestseller, and I could just talk about it all day. But The Fury of the Gods is one of the greatest books of all time. The way that it blends action and character moments, and then like you find yourself just weeping, just in fear of what's going to happen to these characters. I don't know anyone else apart from Papa Gwyn who can kind of craft this way of tension around the characters so perfectly. I've just never felt fear like it. It's just such a unique experience reading a Papa Gwyn book. And I always feel like they just go by so quickly because it's always that one more chapter feeling. You know, you read one chapter, they're usually short chapters as well. Thank you, Papa Gwyn, because long chapters, my nemesis. I do like a long chapter sometimes, but you can't have them all as, 70, 80, 90 pages of chapters. But anyway, The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood is an incredibly scary dystopian novel. That is a classic for a reason. I'm desperate to watch the programme because I've heard the programme of this is absolutely fantastic. But yeah, Margaret Atwood, what a fantastic writer, really incredible delivery of this as well, really incredible concept. And dystopian books, I mean, I would put them in the horror genre because they just scare me. And this book was no exception. It's going to have to go in my A tier. Lonesome Dove. Now, I've chosen this year to... Well, obviously, I've never done this before, but I've chosen to have my rereads on here. So for those people saying, you read Lonesome Dove this year first time, false. This is the second time I've read it. It was a buddy read on our Discord. And it is just one of the greatest books of all time. It is the Lord of the Rings of the historical fiction genre. I think this book and Shogun are just on that level of... They just defy everything you think a novel should be. And Larry McMurtry was just one of our most gifted, one of our most special and important writers. And Lonesome Dove has everything that you want to read in a book. Before They're Hanged. Oh, now this is a reread as well. I find sometimes maybe if I'm in a reading slump or if I'm just feeling a little bit sad, which can happen, then I will dip into a Joe book. And Before They're Hanged is just one of my favourites. When I'm writing as well, sometimes I like to, inject a bit of the First Law into my veins because it's got that dose of humour, gritty realism, but the humour isn't stupid. It's not silly, it's not slapstick, is it? It's this quippy, dark tone, gallows humour, I would say. And Before They're Hanged is one of my favourite books of all time. It's one of the best fantasy books. I think this is actually Will's favourite First Law book. For good reason as well, because Glocta, Tyrion, eat your heart out. Right, Dune Messiah. As you can tell, I went to watch Dune at the cinema. Dune Part 2. I loved it, so I thought I will then read Dune Messiah. Because Dune, the book, the first one, I didn't love. I always thought the concepts were great, but Paul, come on, man. How annoying is he? So Dune Messiah, he's still kind of annoying, but he's less annoying. But what I enjoy is all those characters around him, how it plays out. And I think the ending was a fantastic ending. And what I'm excited about is seeing this on the screen. So I'm going to have to put that probably at the bottom of my B tier. I really enjoyed it. There were parts that I thought, do you really need to include this? Do you really need all of this setup? But then by the end, the ending was hot enough to melt stone. Okay, so this is a non-fiction book that was helping me during my writing. It's called Indian Scoutcraft and Lore, and it's written in the early 20th century about Native American ways of tracking animals and making teepees and lodges and other things like that. So I found it very, very fascinating. Obviously, it's not a book that I'm going to recommend to everyone. It's a very practical book that was helping me out. And what I like is that it's written in the 19th century, at the turn of the century. So it was the author was in contact with a lot of Native Americans. So I'm going to put put this book here because it serves one single purpose, which is research. And it was quite dry, but it does the job. So, Scythe by Neil Shusterman, I think, is a YA book that has just taken the world by storm. It is incredibly popular, and the concept is fascinating about these, about these people in society that are called scythes that go down and basically cull humanity because humanity needs to be culled. Not my opinion, in the opinion of the book. And these two characters are taken on as scythe apprentices. And what did I like? The concept. The concept's brilliant. I didn't gel with the writing. I thought the romance was just crazy silly. You don't need that, Neil. Come on. So I won't be continuing Scythe. It's probably my least favourite book of the year, possibly. Didn't gel with that. Lawrence of Arabia's War. I watched Lawrence of Arabia for 5 hours. Huge film. Incredible film, though. And then I went to Waterstones and I saw a hardback of Lawrence of Arabia's War. And I picked it up, started to read it straight away, quickly discovered that this is a book for people who are probably doing a PhD in Lawrence of Arabia, just law, basically. And as you can tell, I am not at university anymore, and I'm not doing a PhD in Lawrence of Arabia's War. So it wasn't the right book for me. Do I think it was a good book? I think it was very dry. But you do need dry books in the world, I'm afraid. I'm going to put it here just because it wasn't a book for me, but I wouldn't want to, slander it or anything. Obviously, D tier, these are still books that I definitely got enjoyment out of. E tier, I'm going to say, is books that I would steer clear of if I were you guys, or if I was just me. If I was living my life again, I wouldn't read it. Wandering Stars by Tommy Orange is the sequel / prequel, it's a bit of both, to Tommy Orange's There. That is one of the most incredible books. Wandering Stars is good. It's not quite to that level of There. It's both a prequel and a sequel. It brings us new characters, mainly in the mid-19th century, and they are taken into the Indian boarding schools and assimilated into Western culture. There was a storyline on 1923, the Taylor Sheridan series, about the Indian schools, and it's appropriately just heartbreaking, horrible to read about, but important, I think, especially important to read about, especially in the context of what we've discovered about the boarding schools in the last few years. It's just harrowing stuff, but yeah. We see characters also from There, and the ending of There, if you've read it, it's incredibly climactic, incredibly just so powerful, the ending, but it's brutal. And you see those characters, and they're struggling through addiction, religion, depression, and a lot more. And Wandering Stars, it does a really, really good job of taking what made There good and then continuing that. I think there was just I just don't think you just couldn't make it any better than it already is. I'm going to put Wandering Stars just ahead of Days Without End. Oh, P.L. Stewart's A Drowned Kingdom. Now, this is a self-published book that is a fantasy book. P.L. Stewart is one of my favourite people. A Drowned Kingdom is just this fantastic concoction of, I would say, Janny Wirtz and Christian Cameron's writing. It's very political, it's intense, it's cinematic. It's brilliant. It's a great read. The protagonist is very flawed. Very entertaining to read from his perspective as well. I really, really enjoyed it. The action is very realistic, and it's about this younger prince from this this very powerful kingdom, and the kingdom is felled, and it's about him trying to bring his people back into the golden day, their golden age. I really, really enjoyed this book. I'm going to put it just below The Will of the Many. And I'm definitely going to be reading more of PL's work. Hilary Mantel Wolfhall. I'm just going to leave it there. It should just be called He. I think it should just be called He. Chapter 1 of Wolfhall is one of the best chapters I've ever read. And we did this as a reread. Not a reread, as a read-along on the Discord. And I thought this is going to be one of the greatest books of all time. And then I read chapter 2. And I quickly realised it wasn't. It's a shame because obviously the Tudor period is so colourful. It's an incredible period of history, and it's just so grey in this book. I'm very upset to be saying that I didn't like it. Oh dear. Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. So what I did was I watched Interstellar, and then the day after I started reading Project Hail Mary. A lot of science. Obviously, there is science in these books, that's fine. What I just thought was the novelty of the plot, of the concept, wore off pretty quickly. I wasn't a big fan of the characters. I know everyone loves the alien. He was fine. But to me, it wasn't enjoyable. To me, the writing voice, it was like picking at a scab, unfortunately. I'm going to put it there. Children of Dune. This is a wacky book, and I was definitely in my Dune hype man phase when I read this, and I could see why people's enjoyment of this series starts to go downhill, especially with Children of Dune. It's a bit weird, isn't it? Unfortunately, I'm gonna put it up here because there were some sections I definitely enjoyed. There were some sections that I wasn't the biggest fan of. The Silver Blood Promise by James Logan is a debut fantasy book that I was very excited about. It's a brilliantly fun book. That's this wonderful concoction of, I would say, Lies of Locke Lamora, The Greatcoats, and my favourite games of all time, Fable. So Fable there's 3 of them. They're just this great, got a British sense of humour. This fantasy worlds that are just teeming with creatures and camaraderie and just everything you want in a fantasy book. And I think the Silver Blood Promise delivered. It was a wonderful postman. James Logan, you definitely work for Royal Mail, not Every, because Every just don't deliver anything, do they? So I'm going to put the Silver Blood Promise in my beta. A Clash of Kings by George R. Martin. I do think more people should probably read this book. I think this series, a lot of people get a lot out of this series. It's got to go in one of the greatest of all times, because that as a fantasy book is truly incredible. Fifth Son by Camilla Townsend is a non-fiction of the Aztec Empire. What I really like is that Townsend filled this book with personal indigenous voices and their own tales. But it was rather disorganised and slightly dry at times. So it's going to go in my detail. Dark Frontier by Matthew Harvey is a Western detective novel that I've been waiting for a very, very long time. So thank you, Matthew, for sending this book to me. I really got a lot out of it. It's about an English policeman, a copper, we'd say. He has gone to America, and it's set in the 19th century. and there are some things amiss. There are some bad things happening to some people that he knows. It's kind of a familiar story from Matthew Harvey, who I feel like he's one of the most reliable authors that I've ever read, because all of his books, I know what I'm going to get. I know that I'm going to get really interesting characters, iconic dialogue. I know that I'm going to get set pieces that are crafted with a lot of care. And what I love is that Matthew Harvey also reads and loves a lot of books that I love, that I hold dear to me. So his influences they're there. It's like Philip Chase, he loves a lot of books and a lot of literature and a lot of time periods that myself, Will, Papa Gwyn, it's part of our DNA. So you kind of have to love them, don't they? Because they're gonna be part of you. I'm gonna put Dark Frontier just ahead of Days Without End. It's a great Western book filled with detective scenarios, but at the core of it are friendships, and I really, really appreciate that. So The Ill-Made Knight by Christian Cameron is a historical fiction book, and this is a reread for me. It is set in the 14th century, at the beginning of the 100 Years' War, and it follows William Gold, who is a young boy hoping to become a knight, a premise we have heard and seen many times. But as a historical fiction novel, it's one of the best out there. It is the character describing his life as if it's a memoir, and it does so fantastically. Now, no one can do historical detail and authenticity like Christian Cameron. My favourite director is Robert Eggers, and he has an intention for detail, just like Christian Cameron does. So I'm going to put it just ahead of Housemaid of Dawn. Hyperion by Dan Simmons is a great book. It was on our Discord. It was a read-along. It is a sci-fi epic that is completely different to how I ever expected it to be. I don't know what I expected it to be, but it was just so different. It's so unique. I understand why Dan Simmons is kind of a cult writer and Hyperion is a cult classic. There are so many themes and ideas that are staples of the sci-fi genre, and they're just done so well. And that ending was truly remarkable. So I'm going to put it in my low A tier. Right, we have a Storm of Swords. I think the way that A Clash of Kings ends, that's the peak of A Song of Ice and Fire for me, and then it starts to go down, because I think I enjoyed season 3 of Game of Thrones more than I enjoyed A Storm of Swords. But A Clash of Kings I enjoyed more than season 2. Is that sacrilege to say? Am I going to be kicked off? I'm going to put Storm of Swords, just under, maybe just ahead of Dune Messiah. Some incredible scenes, and then there's a lot of stuff in between, but still great. Jade City by Fonda Lee. Now, I always think of this book fondly. Jade City, it's this fantastic fantasy book following, you're in this city, you're in this world where there are gangsters and gangs, and it's a world that is probably familiar to us if you've seen any films with gangsters or read any books with them, then you know kind of the ground that you're getting into. But to see it in a fantasy world, I'm not a big fan of urban fantasy, but this book has made me a fan. So I'm going to put it just ahead of Silver Blood Promise. Fondley's writing is great. Stoner. Stoner's a tale of success. It's a tale of blissful marriage. It's very heartwarming. It's all about promises that are kept. No lying. John Williams is a great writer. I think my favourite book by him that I've read out of the two has to be Butcher's Crossing. But yes, Stoner is a wonderfully written book. I did really enjoy it. I got a lot out of it. As a teacher, I was a teacher anyway when I read this. I'm not anymore. It was kind of sad. It's very heartbreaking. But I'm going to put this just behind Anna Smith Sparks' A Sword of Bronze and Ashes, which might also be sacrilege to people that it's not in my A tier or my goats. But Sword of Kaigen, that can go. Ooh, this is a reread for me. I think I got FOMO that Will was reading it for the first time, and I wanted to join in. I think that's a healthy looking goat list. There's no boar goats there though, are there? I'm just kidding. Right, Cormac McCarthy, his Outer Dark. This book is incredible. It's one of his earlier works, and what I feel is like this book is a practice run. It feels like he's practicing for Anton Chigurh's character, the biblical sentiments of sin in Blood Meridian, the apocalyptic nature of the road. It's truly mesmerising. And Cormac McCarthy was one of the best writers of all time. You just can't deny it. Every word just drips with immersion. McCarthy points just so much attention to the human condition. And yeah, he has a masterful brush and he paints a gruesome, bleak, vivid picture with that. I'm going to have to put Outer Dark maybe just below Return to Adan. Because, I mean, is there enjoyment from it? It's a very uncomfortable book. But that's what Cormac McCarthy does. He makes these horrifying reads, at times beautiful, at times just, again, horrifying. Gates of Athens. Now, I was talking earlier about how historical fiction I've struggled with lately. But Gates of Athens recaptured my love for historical fiction. And I haven't really massively gelled with Conor Goodin's books since I was a teenager. But this book, I thought, how can this book top Gates of Fire by Stephen Pressfield? It can't. It just can't. It didn't top it, but it was close. It was very close, and I didn't think that would be possible. I'm going to put it just below Return to Adan, because it's the story of the Persians invading Greece. We've all heard it, we've all seen it, we've all read about it, we all know about it. But it's the story of Athens in that time, rather than the Spartans. There are Spartans in it, there are sections of Thermopylae, but you've got that section, you're following these people who are incredibly famous. You've got Themistocles, Xanthippus, Aristides the Just, these Greek characters, these Greek figures who we know of today. We know of, incredibly intense political leaders, mavericks of their time, really. And seeing it from the Athenian point of view is brilliant. And Conor Goodin, the central character, I would say, is Xanthippus. He's got such an interesting mindset behind this character, one that I haven't read before in a historical fiction book. It's got great action. There's no kind of sense of incredible focus on the details of the world. It's more like, let's get to know these characters. Let's see how they move, how they interact with each other. And then let's have some gripping battle scenes as well. So I thought, this is going to be my favourite historical fiction book of the year. And then I read Arthur by Giles Christian. I don't know how he did it, but it's just incredible. It's the third book of the Arthurian trilogy, which it started off as Lancelot as a standalone, and then I think it was, Giles Christian obviously has poured a lot of love, energy into this. He clearly loves the mythology and the history behind Arthur. And this book was just remarkable. It's mesmerising. There are some great nods to Arthurian literature in this book, and it's the best of the trilogy, and it had me weeping. Who's cutting onions? Giles is cutting onions. There's a lot of onions in this book. It's got to go at the top of my A tier. Okay, so Stormcrow by Ben Kane is a Viking Ages book set in Ireland, and it is a book that follows a character seeking revenge, which we've all heard of. What I feel like is that this book, it tries to shoehorn a lot of stuff, a lot of unnecessary things into it, and I understand why, but it felt very forced. It felt very, very forced. And I will say the dialogue didn't feel immersive. It didn't feel like it was a book really focusing on the details. It wasn't a book that was really trying to immerse you in a time period, or kind of whisk you away to another land. It just felt very contemporary. Yeah, it's not my favourite, unfortunately. Plains Indians Regalia and Customs. So this is by Michael Badhand, who is one of my favourite people. I ask him questions probably every week. He is a Native American. He is an incredible part of the Native American historical movement in America. He goes around to museums. He goes around to many places. And he's incredibly informative. He is a leading voice on history, on clothing, on customs, on everything to do with specifically Plains Indian tribes. As someone who's writing a book, who's almost finished, writing a book about, it's a fantasy book inspired by Plains Indians like the Lakota, the Comanche, and many others. This book is so valuable. But what I found is that I speak to Michael fairly regularly, and I'm always asking him questions, and he's just so helpful. He's such a gentleman as well, always willing to answer, even maybe something that he would consider a stupid question. But yeah, he's so kind, and this book is incredible if you want to see all of this, because all these costumes, this regalia are things that he has made himself. He has made them for museums. He's made them for many other purposes. He's been in films. He's been in Dances with Wolves and many other films. He's, as I said, a leading voice in this area. And his book, this non-fiction book, is just fantastic. So it's definitely got to go in my A tier alongside N. Scott Mummaday. So on to Berserk then. We have 13, 14 and 15. So 13 is the ending of the eclipse. It's heartbreaking. Now there are parts of this that I think are not handled in the best way at all. Very uncomfortable viewing, reading, and it really put me off of Berserk because there were just a lot of details which I can't really mention on this, or it'll the video will get deleted, I'm sure, by YouTube. But yeah, I wasn't a big fan of it, so I'm going to put it down here. But then we have 14, which is a return to glory. It's a reflection on the Black Swordsman arc, and it was another masterpiece of Berserk. And then we have 15, which I think was just a pretty much a solid entry. And I will say that Legolas has fallen off. Right, now we have Babel by R.F. Kuang. Now, R.F. Kuang is a very polarizing figure, her books, because they're just very conflicting. There's a lot of chat about both sides. Do you love them? Do you not love them? Some of the Poppy War I loved, some of the Poppy War I didn't. I really enjoyed Yellowface. I was very much excited for Babel by R.F. Kuang. It's a historical fantasy. It's an inspired take and trying to really get underneath and delve into the history behind colonialism and empire. And what I find is that I really agree with what R.F. Kuang is trying to say. I just think there was no nuance at all to the writing, which was very, very frustrating, because whenever I listen to R.F. Kuang speak, I just find her so fascinating. I always just agree and find myself being like, wow, that's an amazing way of saying this point and amazing way of putting this. And then I read her books, and this to me just didn't hit the heights of what I think she's capable of. So yeah, it wasn't a book for me, unfortunately. There were some really good moments, but it just felt very incredibly heavy-handed and not done with, as I said, any nuance. A Time of Dread, Papa Gwyn, obviously this is a reread for me. We reread the trilogy on the Discord. Now, we'll do it chronologically. That's fine. But A Time of Dread is book 1 of Blood and Bone, the second series after, the series after The Faith and the Fallen. Pam Macmillan are actually reprinting the trilogy in paperback, but with new covers to match the original colour palettes of The Faithful and the Fallen, which is very exciting. A Feast of Crows has the pace of an asthmatic snail. It's going to go in my detail. Mistborn, Brandon Sanderson. I was very excited to read Brandon Sanderson because he is heralded as the best fantasy writer today, living. But yeah, Mistborn, book 1, The Final Empire, I believe it's called, is a very conflicting book because on paper, it's got all those things that I should love. It's got an interesting central character, a coming-of-age story. It's got magic and fantasy elements and a world that has brilliant world building. But the characters, to me, are very bland. The writing is kind of paint by numbers for me. And I know people say his prose is, it's stripped back. It's simple. It's straight to the point. But I feel like his prose is very layered to force the reader to see something. It's very heavy-handed. And it just completely takes me out of the story. I feel like there's no subtlety. And does subtlety make a good book? Not all the time. It definitely helps. But you can have something... I'm reading Jade War at the moment, and I'm loving it. But it's quite heavy-handed. If you meet a character, or if Fonda Lee wants to highlight something about what's happened to the character in the last few weeks, she will just have a few paragraphs explaining that. And it is very heavy-handed in terms of... there's no build-up, there's no layers upon it. You're not finding out about the world through dialogue. It's telling, not showing. It's not as subtle. But Mistborn just feels so just unsubtle that you are being forced to think about these characters in a certain way. And I found that with another Brandon Sanderson book that I read. So, yeah. Flashman by George someone. Is a book that I think it was written in the 60s. It is the story of essentially Jezal Dan Luther, and it's a similar time period to Sharp by Bernard Cornwell. And Flashman is a character who is part of the British aristocracy, and he then finds his way into the army because he's fleeing, I believe, an ex-lover's husband or something. He's in trouble, so he's got to join the army, of course. A very, very popular historical fiction series. I don't think we've ever put out a video about historical fiction books where one of the comments isn't, have you read Flashman? So I've read the book 1 now, and what I found is that the writing is great. The quippy prose is really fascinating and really fun to read. But the character of Flashman, you just cannot stand him. And there is sexual assault within, I think, the first 20 pages. And this character, he has no redeemable qualities. And I think there are a lot of people that like that about him. But I found I just detested him. So I don't really want to read any more about him. So I'm going to put Flashman at the bottom of my detail. A Good Deliverance by Toby Clements is a new historical fiction medieval novel, and it's following the story of Thomas Malory, who is kind of the father of the Arthurian genre, I would say. And he's in prison, relaying his life story to a boy who was working at the prison. And it's a great historical fiction book. Toby Clements delivers. His Wars of the Roses series is fantastic. So I'm going to put this at the bottom of my seater. It's very, very enjoyable. Really interesting writing voice. The Dying Grass by William Volman is probably the book that I'm most proud of getting through, because it's 1,400 pages and I took it very, very slowly. William Volman is an incredible writer, and you would think, okay, it's a 1,400 page book, it must be incredibly self-indulgent. But it's such an important book to read. It was incredible. It's so visceral. It's the story of the Nez Perce War in the mid to late 19th century. And William Volman's a fantastic writer. You have POVs on both sides, but the book is very complex, I would say. It's hard to recommend to everyone. I sound like an idiot saying that, because I really enjoyed this. But I've read so many books about this time period, so it's one of my passions. And I would say it would be hard to read this book if you don't have a passion for prose, if you don't have a passion for literature, or if you don't have a passion for 19th century American history. Luckily, I have a passion for all of that, so it's definitely a book that I absolutely loved. William Volman uses the page as a sort of landscape, where depending on where the indentation is on the page is depending on how close a character is to the central POV, or what voice you're going to be writing with and reading about. And it's just a fascinating book. It also made me cry like just like a baby, really, like a really sad baby. It's an incredible book, and I'm going to have to put it just below. Oh, it's got that emotional connection, which it's a ticket to greatness, isn't it? In especially in my favourites. It's a hard one. Where does it go? Because Return to Adan made me cry. But then Before Their Hang didn't make... No, it did make me cry. Yeah, no, it did. Arthur made me cry. Time of Dread made me cry. A Clash of Kings didn't. But it's got to go there. Roundhouse made me cry. Sword of Kai... Yeah. Okay, they all made me cry. So I guess I'm a weeper. What can I say? It's got to go there. It's got to go there. A Time of Blood. Papa Gwyn. Do I prefer it over A Time of Dread? I'm a sucker for a book one, so I think it's got to go there. A Time of Blood, what it does great is you've got there's less POVs in The Faith and the Fallen, and you spend far more time with them, and you have the ending of A Time of Dread is pretty explosive. So Time of Blood is just full throttle. It doesn't feel like book two. It doesn't feel like it's there to set anything up. It feels like it's just gun-ho, basically. A natural history of dragons. I love dragons. I'll read anything with dragons on. This book is a kind of a fantasy memoir written as if it's in the Victorian period. And it's a really interesting book. It's exciting at times. I feel like it did start far stronger than it finished. So yeah, I'm going to put it just underneath Children of Dune. Stephen King, Misery. I shouldn't have found this funny, but I couldn't stop laughing. There were some really funny moments here, and it's a horror book, so I probably shouldn't have found it funny. But yeah, I guess gallows humour appeals to me, but have I got a leg to stand on? Who knows? Misery, Stephen King. I listened to it. I definitely am keen to watch the film because I love Jimmy Caan. I'm going to put it just above Fifth Son. Glorious Exploits, Ferdia Lennon. Do I need to talk about this book any more than I have? It's undoubtedly going to go in my goats. But where is the question? It's hard, isn't it? It's a Greek, Syracusean historical fiction about two potters wanting to put on a Euripides play featuring the local, recently beaten Athenian soldiers. And this book made me laugh as much as it made me cry. It's got to go. It won my book of the year 2024, so I think it's got to go there because these were rereads and I don't have that in my awards. And I'm very... we're very mindful that we wouldn't have The Fear of the Gods win every award, because it would, because it's just an incredible book. But we can be biased. Not. Silence of the Girls, another reread. Yeah, this book is going there. It's the best Greek mythological retelling. It's the best prose I've ever read. It's incredible. Gates of Fire. Again, so these are rereads. As you can see, I'm now on holiday in Crete because I took all books, just about Greek books, with me. Now, do I prefer The Silence of the Girls over Gates of Fire? It's a tough one. They're so different. Military historical fiction that's groundbreaking, or Greek mythological retelling focused on Briseis. What I find so strong with both these is the really clear sense of prose style, as well as the focus on found family and relationships. I think I'm going to let it sit like that. That's the thing, my list, it changes all the time. The Virtues of War is another Stephen Pressfield book, and this is one to read. It's about Alexander the Great from Alexander's perspective. He's relaying his life, all of the battles and the wars that he's won, to, I believe, his cousin. It's great. It's a good book, very solid. But it's for someone who is obsessed with Greek warfare, which I think could potentially be quite niche. But it's Stephen Pressfield, so it's great. Mary Renault, or Mary Renault, as some people tell me to say. I do trust them. I don't trust myself. Mary Renault is, I would say that she invented the Greek mythological retelling. Would I say genre? Sphere of books. And I think she is the original Madeline Miller. The King Must Die is the story of Theseus and the Minotaur at Knossos, the labyrinth underneath Knossos, which I did actually read part of this book when I was at Knossos, which was very just a surreal moment. I'm going to have to put it just underneath Will of the Many. People should read Mary Renault. The Killer of Men is a historical fiction focused on Aramnestos, a very similar time period of the Gates of Athens. Aramnestos is of Plataea, who is allied to Athens, and it is Christian Cameron at his very best, so I'm going to put it just ahead of The Ill-Made Knight. The Women of Troy is book 2, or that comes after The Silence of the Girls, and it is yet again another great Pat Barker book. It's not my favourite, but it's incredible still. What I find, the Silence of the Girls features heavily Achilles and Patroclus, and to me that is the most fascinating relationship I've ever read in books. And The Women of Troy doesn't have them. Spoiler alert. It's the Iliad, guys. I'm sorry. Bloodsong by Anthony Ryan has always been one of my favourite fantasy books. I reread it because I think I saw Mike from Mike's Book Reviews was reading it. I don't think he gelled with it, which is a shame. When I read it, I absolutely loved it. When I listened to it this time, it was still great. I do enjoy a school setting, but maybe not as much as I once did. But it's still a very solid fantasy book. A Time of Courage, I would put that just ahead of A Time of Blood for me. Yeah. It looks good. Okay, now this is when I started to re-fall in love with fantasy. The Daughter's War, Christopher Buehlman. Incredible book. You will never see goblins like these, and it will make you want a really big pet crow. Between Two Fires is a historical fantasy, which reminds me of Berserk. It's a fantastic book where you have this knight who's lost his purpose, escorting a young girl to Paris, and he feels like there's something going on. She might be holy, she might not be, but it plays out fantastically. Midnight Falcon by David Gem was a reread for me, but it's just one of my favourite books of all time. I would probably put Midnight Falcon. It's my favourite Gemmell book. Bane the Bastard is a wonderful, wonderful protagonist. Dungeon Crawler Carl. I find it really hard to say the word Carl. But Matt Dinnerman, he's taken the world by storm, and I think Matt Dinnerman was Will's Author of the Year. Dungeon Crawler Carl, they're so funny. And I am a sucker, as I said, for book one. I really loved book one. I'm going to put it just at the top of B tier for me. But it's such an interesting premise of a game show hosted by aliens, basically. And Carl and Princess Donut who's a cat, have to get through it. Get through this game show. And for this series to make me love cats, it must be written well. Carl's Doomsday Scenarios, book 2. It takes everything that you love about Dungeon Crawler Carl and just ramps it up to 11, basically. But I always love being integrated into a world for the first time. So I'm going to put it just shy of A Drowned Kingdom. Shadow of the Gods. Again, obviously a reread. We were reading this on the Discord with everyone. I would probably say Shadow of the Gods is it my favourite Papa Gwyn book? It's that or Malice, or Ruin, or Wrath, or Valor. The Grace of Kings by Ken Liu. I'm so angry with myself that I didn't love this. I'm not angry with Ken Liu, because he wrote The Paper Menagerie, and for that book, the way that it crushed me, specifically that short story, I can never be angry at him. But The Grace of Kings was to me a history textbook and not an epic fantasy. It was very, very dry, with no characterization, in my opinion. The dialogue felt like it was lifted from a textbook. And I need characters to really connect to get behind, especially in epic fantasy. It's so important, I think. Epic fantasy, like you couldn't love The Lord of the Rings without being invested in the journey of the Hobbits or Aragorn or any of the Fellowship. This book to me felt like a non-fiction it's based on, I would say, the Western Han dynasty with the names changed. But I did enjoy it probably more than Mistborn. Now on to Shauna Lawless, who I think could potentially be changing the landscape of fantasy for the better. She is a maverick, and these two novellas that filter between book 2 and book 3 of The Ghoul Song are just mesmerising novellas. Now, can you rate a novella as highly as a full novel? This list is on enjoyment, so yeah, I'm going to say I can. Now I'm going to put probably both of them at the top of my C tier. Actually, no, I'm going to put them both at the bottom of my B tier. But what they do is they add so much to the world, and I think if I hadn't, well, I would have loved book 3 anyway, because it's a superb book. But to have the context of these two novellas mixed in there is so impactful, so important. So definitely, I think more authors should be releasing with their publishing houses novellas before a book 3, before the ending of the trilogy. Do it, guys. Do it. The Vinland Saga. This is, I believe, it might be number 2. It's a fun read. I enjoy them. I enjoy them a lot. Land of the Living and the Dead, as I was saying, Shauna Lawless. This book just made me... Well, the novellas made me love this book even more. But this book, I mean, it had a scene where I actually had to message Shauna Lawless and say I can't believe what I've just read, because it was just incredible. I'm going to put it just ahead of Hyperion. It was that good. Ravenheart by David Gemmell. Now, when I first read this, I said this is my favourite Gemmell book. I think it was recency bias. It's an incredible book. It's got my favourite Gemmell character called Jane Grimake. No, do you know what? It is my favourite. It is my favourite. No, they're both going to have to go. Oh, I'm just too kind. I'm not kind. But I just love books. I love books. Midnight Falcon, it's so good. And Ravenheart. Yeah, the ending is better. The ending is insane. But you have Jane Grimake. This is book 3 of the Rigante series. And I would say the Regante series by David Gemmell is the series to read if you like Papa Gwyn's books. And Ravenheart, book 3, is just mesmerising. Now, The Last Argument of Kings has got to be up here for me. I'm a First Law fanboy. I think the First Law is my favourite fantasy series after The Faith and the Fallen. And this book has, I think, Logan's best scenes. Yeah. The Fall by Ryan Cahill is a prequel novella to his Bound and the Broken series, which I am in need of completing this year. I need to read them. I need to reread book 1 and then read them. I really enjoyed this novella. I'm going to put it in the centre of my C tier, probably just shy of Arnie, because it does a lot to enhance the rest of the series, but I definitely need to go and reread book 1 and then carry it on. So I probably would have enjoyed it even more if I'd read more of the series. But I just love the fact that the indie prince himself is releasing novellas that filter between his books as well. Now, The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. My criticisms with Mistborn are the same here, but just even longer. I mean, Way of Kings is probably about 3-4 times the size of Mistborn. So I'm going to say I didn't enjoy Mistborn, and I didn't enjoy The Way of Kings. That's my longer version. As I said, it just feels a little bit like writing by numbers, and I know I've probably seen criminal for saying that, but yeah, I hate being negative. I don't want to be. Godkiller by Hannah Kaner is a fantastic premise. You've got this young girl who, as the title suggests, is a god killer. But you've got a really interesting found family relationship dynamic here. You've got a really interesting party that plays out fantastically. And the ending, I think, was superb. So, yeah, it's going to go in the centre of my C tier, but it's definitely a series I want to continue. Hunger of the Gods. Probably the best book 2 I've read. Of a trilogy, that is. Can you forgive Papa Gwyn for that ending? I didn't. I still haven't. So this is where people are going to come for me in the comments, because I've put Brandon Sanderson, Ken Liu in my E tier, and I enjoy ACOTAR. I know. Basically, guys, I love Towie. I love Made in Chelsea. I love drama. I love reality TV shows. I love Love Island. And A Court of Thorns and Roses it's just drama. It's the drama, Mick. I love it. So, where am I going to put it? Before you guys take my fantasy card away, I enjoy Malazan. Or Malazan. So, you can't take it away. Yeah, I'm going to put ACOTAR probably... No, I do enjoy it. I won't lie. And Mr. Fury can go just ahead of it. They're fun. They are fun to read. Me and Sadie have been buddy reading them. I love having Sade's questions. I love talking it through. I mean, they are very cliche. They're very, at times cringy. They're very cheesy. But it is the drama. It's exciting drama. And the Dungeon Anarchists Cookbook, book 3 of the Dungeon Crawler Carl series. I'm going to put that I would say here. Again, it's very fun. I think this is the one with the train, which wasn't as fun that bit. But Princess Donut is just iconic. Empire of Silence by Christopher Rocchio is a book I've been really buzzing to read for a long time, and I've just heard amazing things about it. And this book was always good. It didn't quite hit the great section for me. There is a fantastic gladiator sequence, but it's over too short. But Christopher Rocchio is no doubt a fantastic writer. The layers to his writing is so fascinating. His prose is brilliant. And it has a lot of influences that I also love. it promised a lot. So I'm going to put it at the bottom of my A tier. Really, really great book. That the more I drift away, as in time for it, away from it, then the more I think about it and enjoy it. Horus Rising is a Warhammer book. I played through Space Marine 2 when it came out, and I wanted some Space Marine action. And Horus Rising, it definitely gave it to me. I mean, you think it's going to be just kind of a hack and slash, just bloody book, but it's not. It's a lot more than that. Yeah, it's very philosophical. It's very intriguing. There's politics and I really enjoyed it. So I'm going to put it just underneath R. Next to Arnie, Royal Assassin. Come on, Robin. Let's go to the top. The Queen has to go alongside Gurm and Louise Erdrich. Royal Assassin, the ending was such a gut punch. The ending buried me. It was amazing. Storm Rider by David Gemmell is the end of the Regante series. As always with Gemmell, he crafts great characters. It definitely is not the best Gemmell book, but as the ending of the Regante, it's got that bittersweet feeling. There are some wonderful moments here. It did make me reevaluate that bears are in my top 4 animal, but that's okay. The Road, this is the graphic novel of the Pulitzer Prize winning novel by Cormac McCarthy. It's a fantastic edition that I would probably put up here. If you want to see the artwork of The Road in just that post-apocalyptic, dreary grey world, then buy this book. There are some things cut out from the book, which I would have loved to have seen the artwork of, but that's okay. The Unbroken by C.L. Clarke. Now, Sheree is a great person. That is basically Sheree on the front cover. She's hench. It's great. What a fantastic cover. This one, my favourite cover of the year. Now, what I love about The Unbroken is that it unapologetically takes on the foundations of empire and colonialism and just some fascinating concepts written by someone with a very sure hand. And I really loved it. I think I'm going to put it at the top of my B tier. Really, at times, poignant, heartbreaking book. At times, you want the characters just to love each other. Okay, Assassin's Quest by Robin Hobb. I think is universally described as maybe people's least favourite Hobb book. Especially of the Farseer. It's still Robin Hobb though, isn't it? I'm going to put Assassin's Quest just above The Fall. Okay, Ascendant is my new favourite YA fantasy recommendation. It's Eragon, but even better. It follows a boy, a cook's son, as he saves Dragon Egg. Quickly finds out the Dragon Egg that was going to be discarded because it's a blind dragon. But it's just a fantastic book, very, very cinematic, and I'd love to see it on the screen. I think it just felt incredibly visceral to me. Michael Miller is a great writer, and I'm very, very excited to be continuing this series this year. I'm going to put it just above. I'm going to put it probably just below The Unbroken. Michael Crichton's Jurassic Park was a book that was our read-along on the Discord channel. And boy, was this book good. I never thought I would enjoy reading about dinosaur feces quite so much. But I did. Yeah, Michael Crichton sure can write. Jurassic Park is probably going to go just below Ascendant for me. Red Country. Now, this is a book that I buddy read. This was a reread for me, but I buddy read it with my good friend Dan. And we love reading it together. Our thoughts are on our Discord channel. And I love the way that Joe incorporates the Western genre into a fantasy. But it doesn't do it in such a on-the-nose way. It does it where it's obvious this is inspired by Western books, Western films, Western culture. But it takes its own spin, and it just feels so fitting. It's just done perfectly. I don't think Joe could have done it any better. Some really hilarious, fun, brilliant moments, and just some of the best character moments I've ever read. I think Red Country has to go at the bottom of my goats. Yeah. Okay, Until the Last, book 3 of Mike Shackle's series. This is a very action-orientated ending to the trilogy. That is a fantastic ending. Some great characters. The villains in this series are just completely brilliant. I'm going to put Until the Last just below or just above Jurassic Park for me. Mike Shackle's a great author, and I think he's so underrated. Howling Dark for me, I felt like there should have been a book in between Empire of Silence and Howling Dark. But yeah, I'd like to continue the series. I'm going to reread Howling Dark because I was in a book slump at the time. Yeah, I'm going to put it there. Fellowship of the Ring was a read along on the Discord. Obviously, I've read this book before. Of course, you don't get your fantasy card unless you have read the Fellowship of the Ring. I don't quite know where I've just put it. I've put it there. Obviously, it's going to go in the goats. Ooh. I'll put it there. And we have one left. I'm going to ignore that Berserk at the bottom because that is the collection of the 3 that we've already spoken about. So I'm just going to ignore that one. Patrick O'Brien's Master and Commander. I'm going to put it probably here. I just don't like ships. Unfortunately, I don't like boats. I wish I did. When am I going to find a series where I love the boats on it? Maybe live ships. I'll read it before Will. Trust me. I think, guys, we've got there. What a long video. I'm very sorry for keeping you all. But I really enjoyed it. I love making a list. It's like a playlist, isn't it? I just always love that creating of that, something that you love, something that you've enjoyed, something that you've consumed, this art, and then finding out your opinion, talking it through. It's really exciting. I always love watching tier lists, and I've never done one before, so thank you for joining me for my first one. Please let me know in the comments below how much you hate me because of the bottom list, and how many of my goats that you agree with. Now, I think it's almost my biggest section. I just read so many incredible books last year. I think rereads are the most important read, where you really discover how much that you love a book, how much you love a series, and you see those subtleties in the writing. It's especially important to, I think, people who want to write their own work as well. But there we have it. We've all missed Will, I know, but I'm sure he will pop up at some point. But thank you for sticking with me, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to chat with you there. Take care. Truth and courage. The brother.